Turning back to the crowd once more, smiling at each other, cannons explode from behind you inside the palace grounds, showering you and the crowd in confetti as other cannons fire off pyrotechnics into the sky. You each stand side by side looking out to the crowd as heroes of the realm. What happens next with the heroes of the realm remains to be seen. Many more stories to tell, I'm sure. But for now, that'll conclude our story of the fifth phase.
That's perfect timing now with the music.
Yeah, the music addition was great.
Good story, Pete.
Yeah, you did great.
Hell.
I think we need a...
You done really well, Pete.
I'm emotional, guys.
Yeah.
Proper made me teary. Oh.
Yeah.
What you just saw was the end of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign from January 2022. This campaign started in January 2019, lasting just over 3 years, and as you no doubt picked up on, it was a pretty emotional moment for a few of us, but especially for me. This was the end of an era. This wasn't just the end of the campaign, this was the end of the first full campaign I'd been a dungeon master for. Now, I learned a lot during that time, and my life changed immeasurably over that period. But the tears here weren't just because it was the end of the campaign, it was also because I'd rediscovered the magic of D&D. That magic being... therapy. Okay, a disclaimer before I get any further in this video, I am not a medical professional, nothing I say in this video should be taken as medical advice. Therapy is great and you should absolutely go and get it if you can, and nothing in this video is trying to say that Dungeons & Dragons can replace therapy. So, with that said, Dungeons & Dragons is actually just therapy. Now, what do I have to back this statement up? About 6 years of playing D&D, several trauma-ridden characters, and an unhealthy obsession with this game. I'm doing great. Now, it took me a while to come to this conclusion though, because I came away from several gaming sessions with genuine feelings of anger or sadness or betrayal, and I wasn't exactly sure why, until I actually really sat down and thought about it. It was one of those galaxy brains seeing the whole universe moments when I realized that I was just working through my own stuff through the vessel of this game. So, join me as I try to explain to you why Dungeons & Dragons is actually just therapy. Now, to get the elephants in the room out of the way early on, number one, what I'm about to say about Dungeons & Dragons could realistically apply to any number of tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs. D&D is the one that I have the most experience with though, so it's the one that I'm going to be talking about. And number two, everyone plays Dungeons & Dragons and TTRPGs differently. What I'm going to talk about is just my experience with this game. Now, I know everyone who's played D&D or other TTRPGs is going to have different opinions, different feelings, and all of them are valid, but I'm going to talk about my ones. It's my video. So in case you have no idea what a Dungeons & Dragons is, or think I'm talking gibberish when I say tabletop role-playing game, here's a super quick rundown of how it works. Dungeons & Dragons is one of many tabletop role-playing games in which a group of players collaboratively tell a story. The story is managed and reacted to by the Dungeon Master, who provides the players with a hook, and the players, who are controlling their own characters, tell the Dungeon Master what they wish their character to do. Dice are rolled if needed, a story is told, and huzzah! The dungeons have been dragoned. D&D really is that simple. The Dungeon Master provides a hook, the players react to that hook, then the Dungeon Master provides a new hook, and then the players react to it in a continuous collaborative cycle. This is the basis of what role-playing is and is the RP in TTRPG. Because the players are controlling characters, they sometimes need to think about what the characters want rather than what they want, and that is what role-playing is. The act of embodying another character. So, what about D&D as therapy? Well, first I wanted to look at some of the mechanics of the game and how that crosses over superficially with therapy or therapy-adjacent terminology. For example, for me, the experience of creating something, like when I was a dungeon master and created the world and filled it with people and cultures and creatures and politics, that was a creatively fulfilling and therapeutic experience for me. Not everyone is going to feel the same way, but for me, that creative expression was, in the most superficial way possible, therapeutic. But that's not really what I want to focus on, so let's dive a bit deeper. With D&D specifically, its theming is really broad. While it is high fantasy, you can have a bunch of micro-themes within that umbrella term, because you could be playing through dungeon crawling, or heists, or social or political intrigue, or loads of other different scenarios within this giant game. And not to mention that D&D can be played across tens, if not hundreds of sessions. And with that widespread of both themes and time, there's a lot more opportunity to input more of yourself into a character than in other TTRPGs. While it's still fantastical and there is still magic and monsters, you are still a person living a life that is on some level at least a little bit relatable. What I mean is that D&D has the capability to go a little bit deeper rather than being a superficial character trait. Rather than giving yourself a character quirk, you might have a full backstory. It's that character creation in D&D that allows someone to input part of themselves into it. And because this is a game that features a lot of killing and combat and crime, there's a chance to input a darker part of yourself into your character. And while that darker part might be emphasized somewhat, turned up a little, there might be some shared DNA between your character and you. TTRPGs are a dance between your own instincts and feelings and that of your character, and the more you play of a character, the more you find parts of yourself in there too. And there absolutely will be times where you and your character want completely different things, and that's great. But when the lines become blurred, that's when the magic happens. Not the magic that's in D&D, like a separate magic. Therapy magic. Dungeons & Dragons as a game is designed to have a character come into some sort of conflict, whether that be physical, social, or otherwise. The basis of the game is there is some sort of conflict that you are in the middle of. And if your Dungeon Master knows what they're doing, part of that conflict will be drawn from your character's backstory, drawing on your childhood and anything that happened in your life prior to the game starting, and using that to fuel the conflict. And quite often in D&D, your characters are going to end up with some sort of trauma, because in the game, you're going to be part of an adventuring party doing very dangerous things, and you'll have had a reason to leave home at some point. And it could be something totally innocent, it could just be that you've got wanderlust and you want to explore the world, but chances are, there's going to be something really bad. Hence, trauma. So you've got this game, which is designed to take a character's trauma and work through that trauma in conflict. Which is just therapy for your character. And if your character has part of you in it, that's therapy for you too. So let's take an example from one of my characters. This is Cormo, the halfling rogue wizard. Yes, I'm also an arcane trickster. If anybody knows anything about D&D, it is the most suboptimal build you will ever see. I've been playing him since 2018, it's a pretty long time. I feel like I know him very well. And Cormo's a little scamp. He initially kept getting into a bunch of trouble when I first started playing him. Like, the first time he met a blind guy, he tried to rob him. There was no similarities between us at all. Don't listen to that blind guy, the robbery was never proven. So, Cormo, I thought I got him. I understood where his character references came from. I knew where we were different. I didn't think there was that much crossover between us at all. But then, we played more. And we played more. And it turns out that Cormo has a lot of familial guilt in him. See, he wanted to leave home. He wanted to explore the world, and his family didn't want him to. They wanted him to stay home, take over the family business, follow in their footsteps. So, because of their refusal to let him leave, he left in the night, didn't say goodbye, and hasn't been back in several years. He doesn't know how they're doing. They don't know if he's alive. So, how does that apply to me? Did my parents want me to stay at home and take over the family business? No. However, I am the youngest of 3 brothers, and my 2 older brothers moved away to different countries because that's where their lives have taken them, and they've settled down and happily with partners and children and all that stuff. And I haven't. I've kind of stayed put a little bit. But I'm not exactly next door for my parents either, so do I feel a little bit of guilt about not being closer to my parents to give them a child that's nearby? Even though really, I know that deep down they would probably want me to live my life and do whatever made me happy regardless? Yeah, I think so. I've made a lot of pretty big decisions in my life. I've gone my own way, for better or very much for worse in some cases. But there will always be that part of me that can't help but look back on whether I could have done something differently, whether I could have been a better son, or a better brother, or a better uncle. Familial guilt runs quite deep in both Cormo and me. This is a silly little video about a game where you, fight dragons and stuff. I'm fine. Now, for another example, there's another character I play called Piper. He's mildly well known, he has a degree of notoriety, and every so often someone on the street will stop him and say, "Are you Piper?" Now, in case you don't know what my previous job was, I was a host. I worked on various YouTube channels. I was on camera, and this led me to being mildly well known in pro wrestling circles, or squared circles, if you will. That's a joke for any pro wrestling fans watching this one. I had a degree of notoriety, and occasionally on the street someone would stop me and say, "Are you Pete from Wrestle Talk?" I feel like the similarities between Piper and myself are pretty obvious. What's interesting about Piper, though, is I knew that this crossover existed between us, but what I didn't realize was I discovered how I felt about it through playing Piper. Every time Piper was stopped and asked, "Are you Piper?" there was this pit of something in my stomach. Not Piper's stomach, my stomach. It was a feeling of some sort, and I couldn't place my finger on what it was until I did a big old dose of self-exploration, and I realized that it was a very mild form of dread. And that's when I realized that both me and Piper, we enjoy the spotlight, we enjoy performing for an audience, and we appreciate that audience, but we also can't control that spotlight. And that makes us nervous. We can't turn that off when we just want to shut off from the world. Like me, right now, I couldn't go to a pro wrestling show without being recognized. I had to come to terms with that. And I'm not saying I don't appreciate people coming up to me and saying hello, taking a photo with me, because I do. I just can't control when that happens. For both Piper and me, we're both questioning if any level of fame or notoriety is something we actually want. And if I'm being completely honest here, it's part of the reason I changed jobs. I'm less in the spotlight now. And I prefer that. And here's what's great about all of this, is it isn't real. There might be some parts that shine a light uncomfortably on a part of you weren't expecting, but then you start fighting a horde of zombies, and that artifice is broken, and oh, yeah, that's right, I'm just playing a game with my friends, we're having a good time. You can take whatever lessons you want from this game, and that could be none. Now, I understand that all of this so far has basically just been conjecture and assumption on my part, talking about my experience with the game. And you are absolutely valid to ignore my thoughts about this if you so wish. But you can't ignore the research that backs up my opinions. Checkmate, non-believers! Now, while I could just revel in the fact that there are research papers into Dungeons & Dragons at all, it's worth noting some shortcomings first. There's very few actual scientific experiments conducted about D&D, they're mostly just interviews and surveys and analysis of data on related topics, which, while a great starting point for future research potentially, isn't exactly wholly conclusive. And of course, part of the reason for that is because it's such a nebulous topic. We're talking about the subject of mental health and this game that can be played in hundreds of different ways and in hundreds more scenarios. Research on D&D is hard, but I think it's still worth looking at what is there already, because what I found is quite interesting indeed. A paper by Orla Walsh and Connor Linehan in the International Journal of Roleplaying A paper by Orla Walsh and Connor Linehan in the International Journal of Roleplaying from this year, in which they... A paper by Orla Walsh and Connor Linehan in the International Journal of Roleplaying... A paper by Orla Walsh and Connor Linehan in the International Journal of Roleplaying from this year, in which they conducted an interview with I'm talking too fast. A paper by Orla Walsh and... You know what, I'm just going to do it in voiceover, fuck it. Watch the full blooper reel on my Patreon page. Trust me, there is so much more than this. Recording without a prompter is a nightmare. A paper by Orla Walsh and Connor Linehan in the International Journal of Roleplaying from this year, in which they interviewed D&D players to evaluate the game's impact on their mental health, concluded that there were 5 areas that came up consistently in these interviews that improved mental health: escapism, self-exploration, creative expression, social support, and routine. Now, of course, not all of these are a one-to-one comparison between the game and therapy, but I feel like there's a pretty significant crossover if we drew the Venn diagram. Escapism is crucial to the experience of D&D, immersing yourself in another world, embodying another character whose problems aren't yours, mostly, and for a time just getting away from your own life and any worries that come with it. And this doesn't just apply to playing D&D, this also occurs when watching D&D. I am a pretty consistent viewer of D&D on YouTube, whether it be the literal thousands of hours that I've watched Critical Role, or MCDM, or High Rollers, or Dimension 20, or any number of others. And this feeling of escapism is very easy to obtain when watching this stuff, because you just put on an episode for a couple of hours, or in some cases, 7 hours, you kick back and you immerse yourself in someone else's world. It's been a pretty major part of my life for 6 years now, and I can honestly say that it has helped me during some of my darkest periods. I have shed tears. Boy, have I shed tears just experiencing these marvelous stories. The next positive impact found in the paper was self-exploration, and that entirely links into what I was talking about before with embodying a character that has a part of you in it. And there are some really telling and illuminating quotes from this paper from some of the interviewees, like for example Emily, who said it's easier to put it on your character and say your character is dealing with it. Or one from Charlie, who said a lot of D&D characters come from parts of people they can't normally express. I don't want to say it's a mask, but it's almost like a mouthpiece that you can use to talk about your emotions that you feel. I think it's a really effective method of getting out how you feel without necessarily having to say that's how you feel. All of these names aren't real, by the way, they've been given fake names, just so you hide the identity of the actual people in the interview, but there is a fantastic example from Ash that talks about this exact phenomenon in the paper. Check this out. A poignant example is Ash, who used D&D as a platform to come out as non-binary. I made my character non-binary and they were all obviously completely fine with it, and they were asking my character about it, and then out of character I told them, this is all very real by the way, and then carried on talking in character. I love that for you, Ash. I love it. And as it turns out, this idea of a bit of yourself leaking into your character or your character rubbing off on you has a name. It's called bleed, or ego bleed, as defined by Sarah Lynn Bowman in 2013. Bleed refers to the phenomenon of the thoughts, feelings, physical state, and relationship dynamics of the player affecting the character, and vice versa. This is even part of the basis of psychodynamic therapy or psychoanalysis that's designed to dive into your subconscious thoughts and how they affect your behaviors. For example, talking about and working through childhood trauma. And that's exactly what I was just talking about with ego bleed. You might be subconsciously putting yourself in part of a character, but this game forces those subconscious feelings to become conscious, and you're forced to deal with them through conflict. Look, I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but 1, I really want to emphasize this point, and 2, have you seen the name of this channel? Creative expression was the next point that was raised in the paper, and I can speak to this one personally. I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't sing, I can't play music, I can world build, I can roleplay. Dungeons and Dragons is my creative outlet. That and creating video essays. That's what I've got. And it was such an intense joy to realize that I had something that I could create. I've gone through my whole life not being able to express what I wanted to make because I didn't have the skills to do it. And then there was this, where I can make something. Creative expression is such an important part of life. And for me, and I assume others like me, Dungeons & Dragons can be that creative outlet. Social support was another factor raised in this paper, and without a doubt, playing this game has helped me forge greater, deeper, and more meaningful relationships with my friends. Those closest to me have become my support network. They're the people I turn to when I need them, and they know that they can turn to me if they're in need too. From the darker points in our lives to sharing in the joyous ones, D&D has been an integral part of that social support network. It's been an integral part of my life for 6 years. It's aided in the growth of my social life. It's an invaluable social support tool. And finally, routine, which is the one I can't really relate to, because there's a lot of players and we're all busy and nobody has any time to play anymore. Isn't that right, Rufus? But here's the thing, it's not just this one paper we can look at, because there are a bunch of other benefits to playing D&D that have been researched in other studies, like encouraging perspective taking, increasing literacy and mathematics skills, enhancing social skills and forging connections, training communication skills and conflict resolution, and even just improving overall well-being. And if you needed any more evidence, the RP in TTRPG is already used as a therapeutic tool, with roleplay being used in cognitive behavioral therapy to combat things like social anxiety disorder. So while it is a role-playing game, its basis is still in roleplay. But if you're still not convinced, role-playing games themselves are also being used as therapeutic tools. The Bodona Group is a charity that utilizes role-playing games as a specific therapy tool, while Game to Grow is another non-profit that advocates for the use of gaming for therapeutic, educational, and community growth. They've even made their own tabletop role-playing game, Critical Core, which is specifically designed to be a therapeutic tool, combining developmental therapies with tabletop role-playing game mechanics. Not to mention, y'all ever heard of a thing called group therapy? Like, one of the more common shortcomings of group therapy is the ability to open up to strangers, people you're unfamiliar with. But if you're playing D&D with your friends, that barrier might not exist. So I feel like I've made my point. There is a pretty significant crossover between this wonderful experience called D&D and actual genuine therapy. But before I end the video today, I want to give you one more example of something that ties everything together. Except, it's not really about D&D. Because really, this video isn't about D&D. It's about roleplay. It's about role-playing. Every positive outcome and aspect that I've spoken about so far can also kind of just be attributed to roleplay as a whole. It's this act of embodying a character that allows people to have all these benefits. So now, I want to talk about the story of Ibelin. There's a documentary on Netflix called The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, and it tells the incredible story of a man from Norway called Mats, who was born with a degenerative muscular disease, his struggles with fitting into society, his slowly increasing reliance on specialized mobility equipment, and how his parents feared he would miss out on some of life's crucial experiences: love, friendship, impacting and being an influence on other people's lives. But while his disease progressed, Mats unlocked a way to have everything he wanted, by playing World of Warcraft. Suddenly, his digital world expanded while his physical world diminished. He could explore, interact with others, and he could become someone he wished he could be. He could roleplay. He became Ibelin. And through his interactions with other players, he made friendships, he experienced love, he had an entirely new life. But Mats' involvement in the game didn't just impact him, as the documentary goes on to explore how he influenced other people, helping a woman through depression, assisting a mother in connecting with her autistic son through gaming, even something as simple as asking someone how they were doing and giving them the space to talk about their feelings. Ibelin became an integral part of his guild, Starlight, and spent 8 years playing the game while his disease continued to progress until his unfortunate passing in 2014. The documentary is magical, and I'd highly recommend giving it a watch, as you can tell the people involved put in a lot of effort to painstakingly animate the characters' interactions with others through the whole runtime. Using models from World of Warcraft to essentially rebuild Mats' life through this documentary, it's incredible. It's an entirely unique piece of media, one that makes me so much more appreciative of gaming, this thing that I love, and roleplay, this other thing that I love. And do you see how this crosses over with literally everything that I said in this video? Let's revisit that paper by Walsh and Linehan that I spoke about earlier with the 5 areas that improve mental health. Routine. Mats was said to have put in somewhere between 15 and 20,000 hours into World of Warcraft in the 8 years he played it. In the latter years of his life, he could barely move at all, so having those 8, 10, 12 hours to play with his friends, that's routine social support. As mentioned, the friendships made the space to discuss feelings. There's even an instance mentioned in the documentary where a friend of Ibelin had a computer taken away because of slipping grades in school. So Ibelin, Matt, wrote an extremely heartfelt letter to her parents imploring for her to have her creative outlet back, to give her that release she needed. Social support is vital to the story of Ibelin. Creative expression. During the progression of Matt's disease, his world continually shrunk, eventually being unable to eat, drink, talk, or express himself at all, really. Role-playing gave him the avenue to express who he wanted to be, what he wanted to be, from something as simple as character creation to being able to converse and even flirt with other players. It is the very essence of creative expression. Self-exploration. Role-playing allowed Matt to become Ibelin and explore who that person was. Ibelin was described as empathetic, warm-hearted, funny, a pillar for his friends. So, you tell me, are people describing Ibelin here, or are they describing Matt's? And finally, escapism. I don't think I even need to explain this one. The digital world gave Matt the opportunity to explore, to adventure, to live, as he put it himself, an unchained life. It allowed him to escape from the physical world and his own physical limitations, with Ibelin running the same 30-minute run every time Matt's logged in. That is escapism. Not to mention that World of Warcraft shares that same broad scope that I mentioned before with Dungeons & Dragons. It encapsulates so many different avenues, so many activities, so many different branches, that you have the opportunity for more in-depth roleplay. The Remarkable Life of Ibelin is a beautiful story, and it encapsulates everything I wanted to say in this video. I actually already had a draft of this script finished before I watched it, and I knew I had to rework my script to include it, because it's just that good. It makes its point so much more eloquently than I could. So please go and watch The Remarkable Life of Ibelin and experience the same feeling that I got from it. That roleplay is actually just therapy. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was a pretty personal one. Links and references for everything that I spoke about are in the description, as well as a link to my Patreon page. Thank you so much to my Patreon backers. The credits are on the screen right now, somewhere. Thank you so much. You guys have been an otherworldly level of patient as various projects have come and gone. Thank you so much. If you want to join these people, it's super cheap. And if you liked it and don't want to join the Patreon page, that's super cool too. But why not subscribe? And then you get more when more are made. And like the video, etc. You know the deal. Inner peace and much love.